Kia ora and welcome to Swim Chats, a podcast about swimming. I'm Shona Riddell, a writer and swimmer from Wellington, Aotearoa, New Zealand. For each episode, I talk to a different guest from our global swim community. Please hit follow so you don't miss an episode. To support the podcast, you can leave a rating on Spotify or a review on Apple Podcasts, which helps other people discover it. If you're a regular listener, please help me to keep running Swim Chats by subscribing on Patreon for $5 a month. You get previews of upcoming guests, the chance to ask questions, and lots of good karma. To find out more, visit patreon.com/swimchats. There's a link in the episode description. First of all, welcome to the podcast, Kate. I'll just explain to listeners that we do know each other in real life. I was going to say that we swim together in swim squad, but it's more that we sort of swim parallel to each other.
True.
Because we're in different lanes. So I've probably known you just over a year because I think I joined just over a year ago. I know that you're a sea swimmer and a pool swimmer, but I don't know your sort of swim origin story of like when you started. So would you like to share that first for me and for people listening?
Sure, happy to share that. I actually swam as a child growing up. So I swam in a competitive swim squad called Rainbow, I think it was. And it was at the Boys and Girls Institute in Wellington when that still existed. So lots of really early sort of 5 a.m. starts and getting out of bed at the crack of dawn. And then I went on to play water polo semi-competitively. So I ended up in a team that was, I think it was the under-16s for Wellington, and I really enjoyed playing for a club as well as school. So yeah, I really got into the fun side of swimming through water polo when I was at college. And then I had a bit of a break from swimming. So when I got to university and into my first job, I didn't really swim that much. And then I moved up to Auckland in 2000, was looking to kind of make new friends and settle into life up there. So I joined a swim squad, an adult swim squad there at the Tepid Baths down on the waterfront. And then while I was there, some people said, oh, we do sea swimming as well if you'd like to join. And so I did a few sea swims with them, and then I did my first ever ocean swimming event 2001. Kept doing that, moved overseas for a bit, came back to Wellington, and then again kind of went back into the pool, but swimming on my own. And then eventually I found my way to Barb's group, I think through my hairdresser at the time, who'd suggested that Barb was great and there were really friendly people there. So I found Barb's group, and then I stumbled upon Timon's Bonobos group. Just was down at Freiburg one Friday morning and saw all these people having a lovely time and asked them in the changing rooms, who are you and what's it all about? And then I joined into that squad as well. So now I'm really into it. Sea swimming and pool swimming kind of come and gone a bit throughout my life.
Yeah, that's cool. Thank you. And you mentioning your hairdresser sort of made me think about how, when we're swimming, like we don't always know what people's jobs or professions are. It sort of can come up later. And so for me, I didn't know what your day job was until you were in the newspaper. I think it was about a year ago, and you were profiled about living in Wellington. And you're swimming. Just while we're talking about jobs, do you want to talk about your day job?
Sure. You're right, though. Swimming is a great leveler, so no one really knows what anyone does outside of what we do in the pool or the sea. And I love that side of it, actually, just being a swim buddy with lots of people. But my day job is Chief Executive Officer at Volunteer Service Abroad. I've been here nearly 4 years in this job. And VSA, as we call ourselves, sends New Zealanders into lots of locations across the wider Pacific for volunteering assignments, up to 2 years for each assignment. And it is volunteer work, but we do cover an allowance and accommodation and travel costs and insurance. So yeah, we're a little charity, but doing good work internationally.
Yeah, that's cool. And so as part of your role, I imagine that you get to travel to different parts of the Pacific, and are there opportunities to swim where you are, like when you're not working?
Yes, I do get to travel quite a bit. So I've been to all of our country locations, which spans from Timor-Leste, which is really South Asia rather than the Pacific, through Papua New Guinea, Bougainville, Vanuatu, across into Kiribati and then into Polynesia, so Samoa, Tonga, Cook Islands, Fiji. So I have been to all of those locations in the last few years. But I have to say, swimming hasn't featured highly on my time there, which might sound odd, but the reason for that is that a number of those locations, um, swimming is quite hard. So, due to pollution in the local areas that you're in, particularly if you're in the urban centres, you just can't swim. The risk of infection and illness is quite high. And also, it's sometimes just not safe to get into the sea. So, it might be that there isn't really a lagoon setting and it's quite exposed to the elements. So, yeah, lots of different reasons. And then obviously just being busy. So, often I'm in and out, quite a busy agenda of things going on. But I did one good swim story from when I travelled. I did get to swim at a beach called Bonegi in the Solomon Islands, which is about 2 hours drive out of Honiara over very potholed roads. And you get there and no one else on the beach, get into the water, and there's all these sort of ships and planes and things that came down during the war. Which have now become amazing snorkeling and dive sites. Not far off the beach, you're kind of out there snorkeling, and suddenly there's just this amazing array of marine life and things going on. Yeah, every now and then I get an amazing experience like that in the water, but most of the time it's just work.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, you're on a work trip. And it's also a reminder that not every body of water is swimmable, and not everybody's as lucky as we are to have, swimmable water.
Yes,
Over
indeed.
water, yeah. I know that another of your roles has been with Water Safety New Zealand. Was that your swimming that sort of brought you into that role, or was that more a separate thing?
Yeah, so I was on the board of Water Safety New Zealand. I ended up being the chair for a few years as well. And Water Safety New Zealand is kind of like the peak body for the water safety sector in New Zealand. So Surf Lifesaving, Coast Guard, Swimming New Zealand, but lots of little smaller kind of groupings as well. And I did get into that because I was really interested in water and safety and just how we could do better in terms of the drowning problem in New Zealand. And I was interested in continuing to do a little bit of governance work as well alongside my day job. So, yeah, that was a really fascinating organisation to be part of, and really interesting to see all of the different sector groups that do really good work around water safety in New Zealand, despite the fact we have one of the highest drowning rates actually in the developed world.
Yeah, whereas still,
Yes, yeah, still really high. It's interesting, it kind of fluctuates up and down a little bit year on year, which could be related to climate or I think COVID actually. The numbers dropped a bit and then went up a bit as people got back into open water activities. So can be really influenced in New Zealand by changes that are happening, but it is still high.
and I know that you're a very accomplished swimmer. You're in the fast lane and swim squad. Have you done any long distance swimming? Like, I know you've enjoyed being in swim events over the years. Like, what sort of distances have you done?
Gosh, I don't know if I put myself in the accomplished swimmer category compared to some other amazing Wellington swimmers, but yes, the longest I have swum would be a 10-kilometre swim. And I did it with Fit and Able, which I think you might have had others on the show that talked about that, but they're a great organisation in the South Island that run swim adventures. So we went to Moana and swum on Lake Brunner, which is a really big body of water, very cold in winter, but reasonable temperature in summer. And as part of that 3 or 4 days of swim adventure, one of the parts of it was a 10-kilometre swim from one end of the lake to the other. And the thing I really loved about it was really well supported. So we had someone in an IRB right alongside us, helping out whenever we needed. And there was also lots of stopping. So it wasn't a race by any stretch. We stopped every sort of half an hour or so, had lots of lollies and snacks and drinks of water and even like a hot coffee and things at one point. So yeah, I did it with a couple of swim buddies, which helped, but also just lovely kind of atmosphere and stopping lots and really good conditions as well. So I couldn't claim to be able to do long distance at pace kind of fast swim events, but I really loved that one. The other
10K is
long one I've done.
massive. That's massive. Congratulations.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, I
It was
didn't know
quite
you
an
done that.
achievement to get there. We all felt like, oh my gosh, that was amazing. And kind of a interesting experience because I think that shows that probably lots of people can do that distance, but we just don't quite put ourselves out there to do it.
That's
Did,
exactly the sort of thing that interests me is doing a longer swim, sort of in an atmosphere like that where you're not competing, like you're just there to do it sort of
that's
with
right.
nice people and
I would
enjoy
highly
it. Yeah.
encourage it because lots of us, I'm not really that interested in competing necessarily, but it was just a really nice way to do it. I did do the epic swim in Taupo, but just the 7.5 one, 7.5
Yeah.
K, which is lots of loops around and around. And I have to say, I quite enjoyed it, but I didn't enjoy it nearly as much as the 10K, with some good friends and kind of stopping lots along the way. That was more my kind of style of swimming.
Yeah, mine too. And I've heard a little bit about the Lake Brunner sort of trip that they offer. I didn't know there was a K as part of that. And it's a South Island lake, so as you said, the water temperature can be quite fresh. Were people wearing wetsuits for that?
There were a few, yeah, I'd say half and half. So a few wearing wetsuits and a few not. And I think from memory, maybe it was somewhere between kind of 17 and 18 degrees ish. So for a Wellington swimmer, which I am, that's actually pretty mild. And I don't wear a wetsuit anymore. So I was non-wetsuit. And there was a few of us that were non-wetsuit as well. But it was pretty relaxed about whether you wore a wetsuit or not, just whatever you felt comfortable with.
And do you tend to swim year round in Wellington?
I do now, yes. And I wasn't a year-round swimmer until after COVID, till about maybe 2021, is when I started non-wetsuit and year-round at that point.
And was that, partly because pools were closed and the whole social distancing, or do you think it just kind of felt like time to carry on through the year?
I think it was definitely related to pools being closed. So I live in Island Bay, and working at home, I can see the water from where I am. It was about August, I think it was that second kind of period of lockdown in 2021. I just thought, you know what, I'm just going to go and jump in the sea and have a go and see what it's like. And I just did a lap or two up and down in Island Bay and felt great and thought, actually, it's not as cold as I thought it would be. And I think I can manage this. And I also had been swimming right through summer without a wetsuit. And I've got a good friend in Team On's group who we egged each other on, and we were both kind of jumping in for cold plunges after squad. And then we looked at each other and we were like, maybe we'll just keep going. Like, why don't we just keep swimming and see what happens? And if we get to a point where it is actually too cold and we're not enjoying it, well, we can always put the wetsuit back on, but just never put it back on. And then it rolled around to summer again, and off you go.
Yeah, which was pretty amazing. And yeah, it does seem to be a theme in Wellington that people shed their wetsuits at some stage and just
Yeah.
enjoy that connection. I'm not quite there.
I mean, I found as soon as I stopped wearing the wetsuit, I just felt much more comfortable in the water in a weird way. I felt cold, of course, but yeah, my body was kind of in a better position in the water. So I wasn't getting kind of my hips pushed up and things out of sync, and just so much more freedom to be able to move in your arms and not restricted around the rest of your body. Yeah, it just felt a whole lot better to be without the wetsuit. But I did find it incredibly cold to start with, and I'd have the full-on shakes afterwards and, take an hour to warm up and things, but, that gets a little bit easier as well the more you do it.
Yeah. And do you just sort of learn to listen to your body and you just sort of get more acclimatized and figure out when it's time to get out?
I think that that is the case. I definitely was, quite cautious to start with, so would just go, not even as far as I thought I could go, and then come back and stay relatively close to shore. And I always remember it felt like quite a push to go even to the second or the third buoy, or even once I got to the lighthouse without a wetsuit. That was an amazing moment of like, oh, actually, I think I could do this. So yeah, listening to your body, and my good radar for it was, how do I feel after the swim? So often when you're in the water, it's really hard to tell, am I cold or am I just getting worried about it? But afterwards, I would know based on how much I was shivering and shaking, or whether I could hold a conversation in the changing rooms or not is always a good test as well.
Yeah. And how do you like to warm up afterwards?
I'm a big fan of the layers, so I don't have a shower because I think that actually makes me colder. So stay just straight out of the water and then putting on heaps of layers. So like a thermal, and then a one jersey and a second jersey and the big swim coat, hats and gloves, and lots of warm drinks. So as try to carry a warm drink with me, whether it's a cup of tea or just a bottle of hot water. And then, of course, coffee is great. So food and warm drinks is good as well.
Yeah. Cool. And so this next part, I can cut this out if you're not comfortable talking about it. But I was going to ask about your Europe trip and the long swim that you did over there.
Yes.
Are
Yes.
you all right to talk about that?
Yeah, I'd really like to. Yeah, I'm happy to do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. So, am I right that it was last year? You had a family trip to Europe, and you'd planned quite a big lake swim.
So we went to Italy and we were up in a place called Lago d'Orta, which is about an hour north of Milan. Really, really beautiful spot. And I did an event in the Ocean Man series kind of halfway along the lake to another point on the lake. So I think it was about 5, maybe just over 5 kilometers. But as you can imagine, the kind of that time of year, it was warm air temperature and then warm also in the lake. So it felt probably longer than a typical swim in New Zealand just because you're grappling with that change in temperature as well. Yeah.
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 And yeah, so it's hot European summer. So that's something we're not used to in Wellington. And I remember following along. I think you set up a separate WhatsApp chat.
Yeah, I
So,
did.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so, what was the swim like on the day? Like, even 5Ks is still, for most people, that's a pretty big swim. That would be a good few hours.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it was great. I guess the thing I noticed straight away was those swims in other parts of the world are such a big event. I don't know if you've done one, Shona, but there's all this hype and there's like music and people talking on microphones. There's so much going on. Yeah, there was a lot, and there was heaps of people. I mean, there would have been, I think, well over 1,000 people that were competing in different events on the day. So that was quite different for me. I'd never done an event like that outside of New Zealand. And the other thing I noticed was just probably because of the logistics of it, there was quite a lot of time to get to the start line, and then the finish of the event was kind of an hour from where we were staying. So there's lots of different logistics around it. And then, yeah, just a lot more people in the water, and some pretty competitive people and all wetsuited up, which I found fascinating
Really,
given how warm it was. But people were, I'd say most of the people were wearing wetsuits, which really surprised me too.
different kind of open water culture.
Yes.
And did you enjoy the swim itself?
I think I found that it felt like a really long way, even though I'd done longer swims. And I think that was partly down to as I say, the water temperature, the air temperature, the amount of kind of faffing about getting to the start line and all that kind of stuff. But it was great to do it, and it was a really good atmosphere and good thing to do. So I definitely recommend it to other people if you're planning a trip to Europe or all other parts of the world. I think they do similar swims as well, but not as low key as New Zealand, is what I'd say.
Yeah, that makes sense. And also, it might have felt a bit longer because you were doing it by yourself, right? Like, I'm assuming you didn't know
Yeah.
other people doing it?
Yeah,
Like,
I
that
think
can be quite a different feeling too.
I think so, Shona. I had my family there obviously, but they're not swimmers, so I was kind of on my own on the swimming front. And yeah, it kind of reminded me it's quite nice to have swim buddies who can kind of go to the start line with you and have a chat and things. So yeah, yeah. And then I found the recovery afterwards quite hard, but I think that's because we were traveling straight away. So the next day we got on a train and went down to Vienna. And then I'm really happy to talk about kind of what happened next because I had a seizure essentially a day and a half, maybe 2 days afterwards in Venice. So it was all quite an extreme kind of experience. And I don't think I know now that it wasn't related to the swim necessarily, but probably that put me into a state where I was potentially dehydrated or, yeah, kind of other things going on in terms of overexertion that might have contributed. Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, I'm really sorry that that happened to you. I remember thinking at the time when you sort of said what happened after you got back that, that sounded quite scary and also quite surreal. Was that the first time you'd had a seizure?
Yes, absolutely. I'd never had a seizure before. And I don't remember any of it, which is also another really surreal thing about seizures or any kind of medical event that kind of leaves you unconscious. So I now know that it was a tonic-clonic seizure, which used to be called a grand mal seizure back quite a long time ago. And subsequently, I've been diagnosed with epilepsy. So I'm happy to kind of talk more about that because it's been quite a major kind of shift in terms of life changes. But at the time I was walking, we'd had a busy day kind of out and about in Venice, and then was walking through the streets and have no memory of this, but I think I kind of stopped being able to talk coherently to my partner and daughter. And the next thing I was on the ground, shaking, unconscious, and then I woke up and I was in an ambulance boat of all things, but that's how it goes in Venice. So they don't have ambulance that drives, obviously, because there's no street. So I was in the boat, and I actually made a phone call. I don't really remember this, but I made a phone call to my partner to say, I'm in a boat. Where are you? What's going on? And that was when I realised that clearly something had happened. Ended up in the emergency room at the Venice hospital for what turned out to be nearly 24 hours. And again, quite a fascinating experience and easier in hindsight when you look back on it. No one spoke English, really, so everything in Italian. I was in a room full of other patients who were also talking to each other in Italian and sharing food and having a chat, and lots of different testing, which really kind of led to the potential that they thought it could have been epilepsy but needed more assessment and things to look at. So suggestion was go home, get some more assessment and see what's happened.
Yeah. And how did you find the journey home? Like, were you still recovering from the seizure at that point?
In hindsight, yes, I was, but I don't think I really knew at the time that that was the case. So yeah, I felt the best way I can describe it is I felt like I kind of had perhaps kind of head injury type symptoms. So really tired, really kind of lightheaded and not quite with it, almost struggling to find words from time to time. So not quite able to string together sentences or get things coherent in my own mind. So I didn't quite know at the time that those are, they call it post-ictal, but post-seizure symptoms that are really common, and particularly when you've had a tonic-clonic seizure because of the deep impact on your brain at the time. So yeah, so we changed all our flights and ended up on quite a long stretch back to New Zealand via Germany in the end of all places, which, again, I have kind of mixed amounts of memory of, but I just remember getting back and thinking, it's great to be home. Yeah.
Mm. So how long was it sort of before you were diagnosed?
Yeah.
Like, what was like after you got back to New Zealand and then the diagnosis, was it a long wait or was it something that happened fairly quickly?
Was a fairly long wait, but I imagine other people have waited much longer for diagnosis. So I can't complain really. And I think the New Zealand health system has been amazing from my perspective. So I was diagnosed in late September, but in order to diagnose epilepsy, the criteria essentially are that you need to have another seizure, so more than one seizure within roughly kind of 12 months to 2 years is the general rule, but it could be longer than that. Or you need to have epilepsy confirmed on an EEG. And an EEG is the one where they stick the nodes all over your head and then do all sorts of different procedures to try to induce a seizure from an epileptic perspective and then see what your brain is doing. So for me, I saw my GP straight away and then I was quickly referred to the neurology department at Wellington Hospital. And they sent me for an EEG really fast, which all happened quite fast, as well as a brain MRI. And the brain MRI thankfully came up fine because sometimes with epilepsy there might be lesions on the brain or things that are causing the seizures. But the EEG showed what's called epileptic spikes, I think they call it, which is where the electrical activity in your brain is suggestive of seizure activity. And then I had one other at that time, minor kind of seizure. So it wasn't one where I fell unconscious or was shaking, but the thing with epilepsy is that there's a whole spectrum of different seizures that can happen. So I'd had another minor seizure and then I had the EEG, which confirmed epilepsy. So that combination of things meant by late September, I'd been diagnosed with epilepsy.
Wow. And at that time, did you know other people who had epilepsy? Was it something you were very familiar with?
I knew nobody at that point. There was no family history of it, which is sometimes the case. There was no, sometimes it's based on having a head injury earlier in life or things like that, but I didn't have any of that history. So I didn't have any family connections. And I also at the time wasn't aware of any friends that had epilepsy, but it is quite a hidden thing. So unless you know, or that person has decided to share it, there'd be no reason why you might suspect that someone has epilepsy. It's quite interesting.
Yeah, I was looking on the Epilepsy New Zealand website, which I'll link to, and I think it said there were 65 million people worldwide who have it, which is a lot. I mean, that's not, I think it's 0.8% of the world's population. And like there are different types of epilepsy, but it can affect anybody, obviously, sort of different ages, genders, populations. Do you know if it's common to develop it later in life?
Yeah, I think your stats are right, Shona. So I've heard it's 1% of New Zealanders, so it'd be about right, kind of 0.8 of the worldwide population, which is quite a few, right? But it's still only 1%, which I guess means you're unlikely to know someone, but you're probably walking past someone on the street day to day, but you wouldn't know. Um, yeah, so I think I was really surprised to be in that 1% because I didn't have any of the history. But the more I read about it, the more I realized that it can develop at any age, and often with absolutely no, I think it's 60% or 65% have absolutely no known cause for the epilepsy. And then there are, though, a number of people who might develop it, particularly in childhood, I think, who could grow out of it, so to speak. But at my age and stage of life, you don't necessarily grow out of it. It's something that you have for the rest of your life. But really common to have no known cause.
Oh, and since your diagnosis, have you come into contact with any other swimmers who have epilepsy, whether they're in New Zealand or anywhere else? Like, is there sort of a group for, like not necessarily a support group, but just people that you can talk to who are in a similar boat to you?
I've struggled to find many, Shona, and I'm happy to talk about kind of what I've done to manage swimming with epilepsy
Yeah.
because it's not an easy thing. I think so the specialist told me a few things when I got diagnosed in this order. So you can't drive, you can't swim, and you can't travel for the foreseeable future. So I was like, okay, that actually takes out quite a lot of what I do, both in my spare time, but also at work. But I've worked out ways around all of those things in different regards. I found a bit of information online, particularly about swimming in the pool, nothing online about swimming in the open water, a bit about kind of what to do if you're just paddling in the shallows, but not much about actual swimming. And then I did come across one woman who's in Barb's group, Shona, and I think her name's Jenny, but I'm not 100% sure because I haven't seen her very much at Barb's lately. Who did come up to me and say, hey, I've had epilepsy. I understand, I think she had a brain lesion. So she was able to have surgery, which then removed the kind of likelihood for seizures. So that is really the only person that I've had just a slight brush with in terms of swimming and epilepsy.
Yeah, which isn't much, is it, considering how many swimmers there are in Wellington? But maybe people listening to this podcast, like someone will be a swimmer with epilepsy, they might be overseas as well.
Yeah,
We have overseas listeners, and maybe they can make contact as well, and they'll have advice and experience. And
yeah.
I'll also mention that, like, I'm recording this in March. Today's the 23rd, and this is quite timely because March the 26th is Epilepsy Awareness Day. And the theme is Purple Day. So it's hashtag Purple Day, and then people are encouraged to wear purple, which I am today, even though this is an audio podcast. But I'll wear it again on the 26th. Hopefully, did I say 26th?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Okay, that's Epilepsy Awareness Day. Is there, like, I know you were only diagnosed sort of in the last year. Are you planning on doing anything to sort of mark the day, or?
Yeah, it's funny. I've had a few thoughts about what I could do because I would like to. I think raising awareness is really important, not just for like me being able to tell my story, which is lovely, but I think I'd love just to meet other people, particularly in the swimming community or even in the work kind of sense who maybe do similar jobs to mine, because you can learn so much from other people that do have it. And yeah, so I struggled with what to do this year because it's all quite new for me as well. And I had thought that I might get some swim caps printed or some towels and kind of sell those and raise some money, Shona. But I've left it all a bit late, so I don't think I'm going to make it for this People Day. But maybe that's a next year thing if I can get organised. So what I'm going to do for this one is actually just share my story a bit more widely. So this is great to be able to come on your podcast, but also I will share some information with Epilepsy New Zealand that they can put up through their channels. And yeah, just really keen for people to kind of know that it's a thing and that it exists. And then hopefully people might reach out and ask me questions, or I can actually just find some other people to chat to about it because it's something I don't know much about and I still don't know many people who have had it. I did. And now that I've got it and talking to other people, I did find out that one of my previous work colleagues, his daughter and his wife both have epilepsy. So that was really helpful, actually, just to have a coffee with him and a chat about what it's been like for him, I guess, as a supporter of his family, but what they've found helpful as well. It was really helpful for me.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. And you've been continuing to swim, with modifications,
Yeah.
obviously. So, in the pool, for example, have you had to do anything differently?
Yeah, well, the first thing was when I came back from Italy, I'd actually dislocated my shoulder during the seizure, and ended up tearing muscles in my shoulder subscapular, I think it was. So that was quite good because it meant I had to get back into swimming slowly. So that was one thing the specialists had said. First of all, they said don't swim, and then they said, well, if you're going to, just really manage your energy and listen to your body. So don't start off a million miles an hour, just go slowly. And also tell the lifeguard. So if you're in the pool on your own, tell the lifeguard. And I did start doing that, particularly at Freiburg, and they were awesome. So I was kind of a little bit nervous at first because I thought they might turn around and say, you can't swim, like go get your clothes back on and leave. But actually they quite often stood at the end of the lane and kind of had a look at what I was doing. So I felt really comfortable with that.
That's all.
And the other thing I've done in the pool is keep swimming with the squad. So and told people. So I told enough people that were particularly in my lane, like you say, Shona, we're kind of in different lanes, but most of the people that are in my lane know that I've got epilepsy. So if I had a seizure in the pool, they would notice, hopefully, because I would stop swimming, obviously, and potentially start to sink. So knowing what to do just to pull the person out, get them on the side of the pool and do the right things from there. So the pool has been relatively easy, although I've just taken it slowly and kind of figured it out. As I say, the open water was much harder to figure out.
Yeah. Just with the pool, you mentioned when you had your seizure, you dislocated your shoulder. So obviously, there's a risk of injury when you have seizures. So just for people listening, if you're at the pool when you have a seizure, obviously pull you out. But also, should people be sort of cushioning you to make sure that you don't hit your head or anything like that?
Yeah, great question. So the reason I dislocated my shoulder, and this is no offense to my partner, but he was trying to sort of wrestle me into the recovery position along with a couple of other people that were supporting me at the time. That might seem like the right thing to do, but actually it's the wrong thing to do if someone's having a seizure. So what you should do is first of all get the person to safety, or if I was already outside the pool, like in the changing room, for example, just move objects away that are potentially things that I could knock up against if I was shaking in particular, and get me to the ground. So I'll probably be on the ground already if I've fallen unconscious, but safely getting the person to the ground. And then actually leaving the person to seize up. So it might be that, my arms and legs are both moving or I'm just moving a little bit, but don't touch the person while the seizure's happening, which is really important to stop things like torn muscles or dislocations of joints and things, because the nature of a tonic-clonic is that tonic-clonic means that you're seizing up and then your muscles are relaxing as well. So if you catch someone halfway through, you can pretty quickly injure them. But you're right to cushion the head. So the head's the main thing. So, maybe chuck a towel under there or something just to cushion the head. And then once the shaking stops or the seizures over, if I was unconscious, I'd come back to consciousness, but be really out of it. So you might be, well, I was, for example, really unsure where I was, what's going on? Where am I? And I might be quite, wanting to get up and kind of walk away, but actually just getting the person to sit somewhere quiet and safe and comfortable. And then I wear a little wrist kind of band on my smartwatch, which has my NHI number, the number to call in case of emergency. So that's a thing that means that whoever's with me doesn't necessarily need to know who I am or who to contact, but you could quickly find that information. And the other thing is, if the seizure happens in a pool, calling an ambulance is a given. And I think that's because obviously the likelihood of drowning is much, much higher, but also secondary drowning is an issue as well. So I might have inhaled water. So even though I'm looking okay and I'm kind of sitting up and conscious, I still need to get checked out afterwards.
Thank you. And you sort of touched on earlier that you're also starting to get back into the sea. Do you want
Mm.
to talk about
Yeah.
the process around that and how it works for you?
Yeah. Well, as I say, I looked far and wide for information about this, tried to come up with all sorts of innovative ways to swim. Yeah. And in the end, I decided that I needed to weigh up my own level of personal risk that I was prepared to take, knowing that there was absolutely a high risk that if I had a seizure, it would be really dangerous in the open water because you're much further away from help, obviously. But for my own kind of physical, mental health, it was really important to me to be able to keep swimming and doing something that I enjoyed. So I did definitely took a good couple of months off swimming in the open water. And then I got back into it slowly, just bobbing and dipping with friends kind of close to shore. And then when I started open water swimming again, two things I did I think have made the biggest difference. So swimming only in shallow water, so where I can stand up, but also the person who's swimming with me can stand up, which means that if they needed to get me out of the water quickly, it's much easier to do that. And the second thing is I swim with a tether. So I think it's designed for triathlete swimmers, maybe where someone's supporting another person and needs to be staying really close together with that person. So it's like a couple of waist belts with a bungee cord between them. And that just means that I know I've always got a swim buddy right there, so you don't end up getting separated. But also, if I had a seizure and I needed help, the cord would go tight pretty quickly. And so it's a signal to the other swimmer, okay, I need to stop and check out what's happening with Kate. Yeah, so those are the two things I've done. Telling people you've got epilepsy is the key thing. And so, Barb and Timon both know, for example, so they kind of keep an eye out for me as well. But particularly in the water, having people that know that you've got the condition, things might happen, but hopefully, highly likely it won't happen, but it could happen.
It's really cool that you can keep swimming because, I mean, it's a big part of your life, right? For one
Yeah,
thing, and for a lot of us, it's a social thing, and it's also that connection with the water.
yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, I'm really pleased
Yeah.
for you that you can keep doing it.
Yeah. I think because you do get told lots of things you can't do when you get diagnosed with a health condition. And epilepsy is no different to lots of other ones, I'm sure. And initially, I did focus a lot on what I couldn't do and sort of, you start thinking, gosh, this is terrible. I can't drive a car and I can't swim. But then for me, like once I figured out ways to adapt and to get around those things, it actually made it quite interesting. So some of the things that I've done now, like shallow swimming, is really fascinating because you see a lot more things under the water, particularly around Island Bay and places that you just don't see when you're quite far off land. It's a different experience. So weirdly, there's kind of been some advantages to the adaptations, even things like not driving. I get lots of lifts with people, and it's really lovely to have car chats and catch up with people, which is another advantage, really. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. I like how sometimes changes, even though they're very unexpected, they can give you a different perspective on things, right? Or
Yeah.
there can be unexpected benefits.
Yes.
And I imagine a big part of things would be rebuilding confidence. Is that fair to say? Like, having a medical episode can be a bit of a knock
Yeah.
to sort of physical confidence and emotional confidence.
Yeah, definitely. And I think because I didn't experience, like I did experience it obviously, but I didn't experience seeing the seizure happen. I think for those around me, it was much more traumatic in some ways. And I've heard that from other people who have seen someone have a seizure, maybe at school or at work or somewhere, and they remember it really vividly. So since I've had epilepsy, actually, a lot of people have said, oh my gosh, someone at school I knew had a seizure and we didn't know what to do. And it was so I think it must be quite terrifying for those people that are observing it. And for me personally, yep, there's a degree of you don't quite feel as confident and invincible in terms of what could happen to you. But I do feel really confident actually that someone would come and help. So that's kind of a cool thing as well, just knowing that there's not much you can do for yourself actually when you're having a seizure. You're very much reliant on people around you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I haven't had a major medical episode myself, but I've had very close family members have major health diagnoses, and I know that there can be quite a roller coaster with emotions and just sort of processing all the new information you get, especially like you said, the medical side can often focus on what the person can't do, like what
Yes.
all the limitations are. But I can't remember where I was going. I had a point and a question. I've lost
I
that
think
in
Fiona,
my monologue.
I've
It was
also
something
noticed
profound.
that it's not entirely solution focused as well about how to get around those things you can't do. So the swimming thing, for example, I've figured out, as I said, what I wanted to do. And then travel's been really interesting as well because that's a big part of my job work-wise. And I will be back traveling internationally very soon. But even just kind of working through all the steps to figure out when am I safe to travel and what do I need to do differently. And yeah, so there's definitely a lot to think about, and it can get quite depressing if you start to kind of go down that rabbit hole of all the things you can't do. But I've had to be really patient and also just try to focus on the things that are going well or the adaptations that I can make. So
Yeah, cool. And I remembered what I was going to say. So, but yeah, basically, like I know that when you're in the sort of immediate aftermath of a diagnosis, you're just sort of taking it day to day and sort of processing. And then there can come a point where you start being able to think ahead and maybe make goals, even if they're different goals. And it sounds like you might be sort of reaching that point if you're able to plan travel and
yeah.
think about things you want to do in the future. Is there, do you feel like there's somewhere you want to take your swimming at the moment, or are you just sort of happy with things as the way they are and just see sort of how it goes?
Yeah. Yes. Well, just so to the first part of what you were saying, the other thing with epilepsy is you end up on anti-seizure medication very quickly. So that's the first line of defense. And for some people that works and for some people it doesn't. So luckily I seem to be in the category of people that it does work for. So it controls the seizures. But even getting used to that is, like you say, you kind of have all these things you have to get your head around. That's been quite an interesting learning experience. Trialing different medication that works or doesn't work, dealing with side effects. So yeah, needing to settle that down. In terms of swimming, you have kind of been pondering because normally I do have a swim kind of goal or event on the horizon, but this summer I've intentionally not put any events in the diary, partly because I can't, but also just wanted to kind of take it day by day and see what happens. One goal I did have was just to try swimming in some different locations in the shallow water, which has been really good. It was great to go with Barb to Plympton the other day. Went out to Titahi Bay with another friend. Even went round the other side of Miramar Peninsula with a couple of friends recently. And yeah, so lots of kind of interesting swims where you can look at things underwater. But I'd like to think, maybe by next summer, seizure free, obviously, and with medication working well, I'd like to think I might be able to get back to some swim events. I don't have any huge ones. I think I just want to kind of build back up to confidence from a distance perspective. And yeah, I'll kind of take it a step at a time and see what that might look like once I've got my head around epilepsy and how it all works.
Yeah, that sounds very like a good idea. And do you have swim events in New Zealand that were particular favourites that you wouldn't mind doing again?
Oh, yeah. Well, I've never done the one at Blue Lake. And so that was on my list to want to do at some point. So I'd love to do that. I've done the Rangitoto swim a couple of times. And although it's a hard one, like it's an early start and it's quite a long way back from Rangitoto Island, which is up in Auckland, back to St Heliers Beach. I'd quite like to have another go at that because it's a really interesting swim to do. I really enjoyed the Fit and Able swim adventure, so I'd love to do another one of those at some point. Yeah, I just think there's so many cool places to swim in New Zealand and lots of places I've just not been to. Even getting up to Lee or Goat Island or somewhere and having a look at what's going on there would be amazing. So yeah, lots of things I'd love to do.
I know. Yeah, there are so many amazing options, aren't there? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
The final question, or not necessarily final, but it's quite broad. But is there any sort of call to action you would like people listening to this to do? So I'm going to publish it on Epilepsy Awareness Day on the 26th. Is there anything you would like people to do in terms of visiting the Epilepsy New Zealand website or doing something in particular to sort of raise awareness or support people with epilepsy?
The thing that I'd love people to do is just to become more aware. And that might just be, yeah, like you say, having a look on the Epilepsy New Zealand website. If you know people who've got it, maybe just being curious in the questions that you ask or seeking to learn more about it. But I do think it's one of those things where, because it's so invisible to other people, it is a really hard one for people to get their head around. And I don't necessarily, like myself, I don't necessarily need a lot of extra accommodations or support at this point. But I have really appreciated those people that are just a bit curious about it. I've appreciated all the people who've gone, hey, you can't drive. Can I give you a lift somewhere? Or, do you need a swim buddy? I think those things are really helpful. So maybe it's thinking about what it is, getting a bit more aware about it. And if there's someone in your life that has epilepsy, I think having a chat to them and perhaps asking them, is there anything I can do practically to support you? Those things will be great.
Yeah, that sounds good. But sometimes people are worried about saying the wrong thing, aren't they? Like, I know I worry about saying the wrong thing to people because we're
Yes.
not always taught what to say.
Yeah, I think so. And I've noticed some people might say things like, oh, are you feeling better now? And it's like, oh, look, I am. Like, I'm feeling pretty good. But you're never better 100%. I think it's the same as someone who's maybe has a heart condition, which is for the rest of their life.
Or a brain injury, right?
Or a brain injury, great example. So you're managing it, but you're managing it as part of who you are for the rest of your life. So I think just being careful about the types of questions you ask, but also the way you frame them is really helpful, so that you're conscious of the person living with that condition for the rest of their life, but that there are lots of things they can do, and they're kind of working it out for themselves.
Yeah. And it hasn't been that long since you were diagnosed, but do you feel that people are growing in awareness of epilepsy and what it is over time? Or is it too soon for me to ask?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I have to say from my own perspective, I had no idea. Like, I didn't really know I had no idea really what it was. I thought I might have seen it in movies or on a TV show or something, but I was probably quite scared of it. So when I was told I was diagnosed, I thought, oh my gosh, I'll be having seizures every week and I'll be, I have to give up my job but in reality, actually, for a lot of people, it's not at that extreme level. It's something that's just always there in the background. So, um, yeah, I think it's one of those things where if you don't know, then you won't necessarily understand what it's all about. And I don't think we can all be experts in every health condition or medical thing that's out there, but maybe even just me having it and talking about it would mean that people might say, oh, I know Kate, or I know of Kate, or I've heard Kate talking about it. So I might go and just find out a bit more about it, which is a great thing, I think.
Cool. Well, yeah, thank you, Kate. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast to tell your story, and to help people better understand epilepsy and swimming with epilepsy. I imagine like there'll be people listening to this podcast who want to get in touch or have their own experiences. So I'll put the, podcast contact details in the show notes, and I'll link to Epilepsy New Zealand. Yeah, is there anything else you want to mention that we haven't covered yet?
I guess one thing I do just want to be careful to say is that what I've described as my experience and also what I'm comfortable with. So I'm not necessarily advocating that anyone with epilepsy could get in the sea and just, start swimming, or advocating that everyone can get control over their seizures with medication. There are all sorts of different types of epilepsy, and there's also different levels of risk that people should or could be taking. So I did want to be really careful to say that, because that's the other thing I've learned, is that you have to just be mindful of what works for you. So I think that's important. Yeah, and I think I've just been so grateful for all the people that have offered help, whether they knew about epilepsy or not. They've just been really curious and really keen to help, which makes it so much easier. It's great.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, yeah, that's a really good point about also everybody's an individual and health and safety disclaimer.
Totally.
Yeah,
And I mean, the thing with
see a
swimming,
medical professional.
yeah, Shona. And the thing with swimming is it doesn't necessarily mean, so I think you need to swim to enjoy it. So it doesn't necessarily mean jumping in the water and swimming exactly the same distance that I might have done a year ago. It can be just as fun to be like splashing around in the shallows and having a great time with your friends. So I think, just accepting what you can do and maybe doing that in a way that works for you is such an important thing to remember. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is a really good way to sum up the episode and the podcast in general. Like we all connect with the water in different ways, and there are lots of different ways to find joy in it. So yeah, thanks so much for your time today, Kate.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thanks for listening to Swim Chats. If you enjoyed the episode, please share it with a friend or two. Also remember to hit follow to be notified when I post new episodes. To help other people discover the podcast, you can rate and review it on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. If you're a regular listener, please visit patreon.com/swimchats to support the pod. Enjoy the water, and we'll see you next time.